Schwarzenegger and in Keith Davidson's case, they seem to try to dirty him up. I wonder how effective that is when these are people that Donald Trump was involved in, not Alvin Bragg.
Right. There was a point this morning and early this afternoon where we were saying, what's going on here? And I have to say, they went much harder after Keith Davidson than they did David Pecker, and we can talk about that in a moment. We've been sort of chatting about that. But I think where they're going, because on one hand, you'd think they would have just stopped at Keith Davidson. Have you ever met Donald Trump?
Right.
No. Because they've got to prove this conspiracy. And when you distill this case, it still comes down to there's going to be a conspiracy, but then you've got to get to the falsification of the business record.
Right.
So you would have thought they would have stopped there. And it became apparent to me as they were going through the cross of Keith Davidson and just how vicious it was, that I think they're trying to make Keith Davidson and Michael Cohn out to be these two scoundrels that were conspiring, and Donald Trump is the victim. They got into this huge...
Of what?
Of an extortion plot, that he was being extorted. And you got into this back and forth that was incredible between Donald Trump's lawyer and Keith Davidson, where he kept saying, well, did you extort this person or that person? And he finally said, I had a civil agreement for which there was payment. I'm paraphrasing. But he goes, I'm not extorting anybody. But that kept coming up over and over. And I think that was sort of the storyline that emerged to me, that this is potentially where they're going with this. I'm curious what Andrew thought, but that's sort of where we were sort of landing on that as we were talking.
So I agree. I mean, I was struck by, if you think about sort of what happened today, it should have happened with David Pecker. And so the surprising thing was there was a very, very vociferous cross, and there was fireworks in the courtroom. But you were like, to what end?
Well, and I guess that's my point. So say you prove beyond a reasonable doubt these guys are scuzzy. So what? Trump was in business with these guys.
So you have David Pecker on the stand, and he's not crossed that way, but he, under his own testimony, says, oh, yeah, we were intentionally defaming people. I was intentionally supporting a candidate, and it was all secret, and it was to get somebody elected. I mean, it was the most shocking. You want to talk about sleaze factor. I mean, it was sort of incredible.
And your partner was? Oh, yeah. Trump.
Yeah, well, that was he's a principal. And who did you have the deal with? Donald Trump. But there was none of that. And so it was interesting to me that the choice was made when there was an easy cross and a polite cross of Davidson to say, as you said, to just say, you didn't deal with my client at all. Everything that you know came through Michael Cohn or somebody else. So you just don't have anything to add to the sort of false documents. And so instead, there was a lot of drama, which I agree is going to be used as a distraction in closing to say, look, they're really extorting him. By the way, that's not a defense. It's sort of a distraction defense.
Right.
But just to focus on what was the import of Davidson, it is how you started. If I had to sum up the actual import of today, it was the quote, what have we done? There was no question that he was saying, and it wasn't just his testimony. Everything he said today was in a document. It was in an email, or it was in a text, or it was in a written agreement. So there was no way to really attack him in terms of his direct testimony. Everything was in writing.
And what did the prosecution need from him?
So what they got out of him was this was about the election. I mean, it was, and even on cross where they said you knew that you needed the leverage and you had leverage before the election and not after. And he goes, absolutely. I mean, that's not a cross point. That is
That's the conspiracy.
Right.
Well, and the piece about the timing of the affair was something Von Hillier reminded me of. I think the affair with Stormy is in 2006, 7, 8. I mean, it's well before the election. The only variable is post-Access Hollywood pre-election day.
No, you've got it. I mean, that's it.
Exactly.
And that text is really powerful when Keith Davidson, he says, Keith Davidson says, what have we done to Dylan Howard? And Dylan's just like, I hope I'm going to get a presidential pardon out of this. Those sort of things came out, but I think today, it really did. I just was wondering how the jury was processing a lot of this Hulk Hogan stuff and him and Keith Davidson dealing with sex tape brokers. I mean, it was tantalizing, but and I get they were trying to muddy him up, but kind of to what end?
I mean, I guess, and I want to hear more about the atmospherics in the courtroom, but just as a trial 101, I mean, does the prosecution at some point have to lean into that and say, yes, all these are tawdry characters?
Absolutely. You have to understand that this is the cast of characters that you're dealing with. And so in setting the stage for your arguments, when you're on summation, you're going to acknowledge that. You're going to basically say, no one here is a saint or nun or a priest for that matter. But seldom do we have that in the criminal element to begin with.
Right.
So you make that sort of par the course, if you will, and normalize it to the jury, and then you make your arguments from there and make sure you connect the dots. Now, you asked the question earlier, to what end as far as Donald Trump being the victim? It doesn't matter to what. Let's all keep in mind, Donald Trump's defense team is looking for one person to hold out. They're looking to distract one juror enough with all of these antics and sleight of hand and muddying different witnesses up to a degree that allows them to say, I don't know how much this has to do with Donald Trump, and I'm not convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump is guilty of the things that he's charged with. So it doesn't really matter whether they have established this notion of extortion. Like Andrew said, that's not really a defense. It's just enough where, in the imagination of the jurors, have they done enough to distract them in terms of these characters seeming like they were in cahoots with each other, or conversely, have we created enough distance between Donald Trump and this situation where I'm not certain how involved Donald Trump actually was, which is where the normalcy of a cross would come in and you would say, you never, like Andrew said, you never actually met my client. You never talked to my client. Those things. I think that both of those are two-track strategies that the defense are using. And you know, the prosecution is going to have to figure out a way to make those connections more clearly as we go forward.
And that's what the documents and other corroborating evidence.
Too bad they've got phone recordings and David Pecker.
Yeah.
Today was a little bit about, I just felt it was, I thought Keith Davidson laid the tracks for what he needed to, and that a lot of this was a bit of a sideshow. And when you think not a lot of today was connected to Donald Trump, we still have a lot connected to him. And they did start playing some of the phone recordings that Michael Cohn, the many that he made, started coming in to evidence. They were very hard to understand from where we were, even in the jury, or even in the courtroom. Some weren't played out loud, but those are now starting to roll in, and I think we'll get a better